You're listening to Liberty USA, sponsored by County Citizens Defending Freedom. As an American, you have freedom flowing through your DNA, and we are here to help educate, empower, and encourage you to stand for your freedom.
Welcome to Liberty USA. I'm your host, Lindsay, and today I have two guests with us. We have Steve Maxwell and a surprise guest, KCarl Smith. Welcome to Liberty USA.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and get a chance to rub elbows with the great Steve Maxwell. Is always an honor. So
I don't know about that, man. You need to speak to my wife about that.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we are going to have some good conversations today. So let's go ahead and jump right in. What was your childhood like?
You know, I grew up in a Christian home. My parents did, I come from good stock. My father's a Bible scholar. My mom, of course, right there with my dad. So very staunch Christian home. You know, we think about conservatism today. I was never converted to conservatism. I've always been one. We just didn't use the word in our family. So I thank God that my parents brought my brothers and I up in a family where we put God first. And I remember as a young boy growing up, we went to church every Sunday, Steve. And I would hide my shoes so I had to go to church. I kind of grew out of that, though. Yeah. But I thank God for my parents and bringing up my brothers and I in the family of God first, a loving family. My parents were married for 69 years. And so every day I saw role models of when God is in your life and you operate in a way where you're a loving husband, a father to your children. That's a role model. My parents were my superheroes, and that's kind of unique because a lot of people can't say that.
It's a great gift. It's a great gift. I was similar. Every time the church doors were open, we were there. Yeah. I remember playing Little League football and had to come from practice in my pads to a revival meeting, that in those days lasted for 2 weeks sometimes, So,
yeah, exactly.
But it's a great gift.
So no, it's a blessing. Like I said, my if you think about white privilege, I came from black privilege. To be honest with you, my father discovered his God-given gifts, his God-given talents, which was being a mathematician, and he took those talents and made it a profession. And he was an engineer at NASA. And retired as a senior exec, which is equivalent to a 2-star general. That's not bad for a man who came from humble beginnings.
Yeah, it's a great American story.
Yeah.
What could happen, yeah.
How did you grow up, politically speaking?
I grew up in a Democrat environment. My parents were staunch Republicans until 1964. So 1964 on, I grew up as a staunch Democrat family. So I became a Democrat based on family tradition, not necessarily based on my values, but I adjusted that later, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, we can go ahead and talk about it right now. So you said that one night you had a come to Jesus moment with a piece of scripture. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
In my individual time of devotion over the years, I read 2 Corinthians 13:5 so many times. But this night, when I read 2 Corinthians 13:5, if you read it in the Message translation, it goes like this. It says, examine yourself. Make sure you're solid in the faith. Don't go along taking things for granted. Test yourself. You need firsthand information if God is in you. If you fail the test, do something about it. And I thought about this and said, well, I'm going to test how I'm voting. Well, I don't believe in same-sex marriage, but I was voting for political platform and candidates that espouse that. I don't believe in abortion, but I was voting that way. So I realized that on Sunday morning with my holy hands, I was worshiping one way, but when it comes to Tuesday, going to the voting booth, I was voting the opposite of my values. And I talked about it in my book where a guy diagnosed me and told me I was a political schizophrenic. He said, I can't trust you. Matter of fact, through the way you're voting, you're blocking your own blessings. So I'm going to hold back my blessings from you because I can't trust you. So that was an awakening for me, but I went through 3 days of depression.
Can I ask, how old were you when this experience took place?
41.
Okay.
41. I just completed my time on active duty. And like I said, I went through 3 days of depression because I love the Lord, but I could not believe that through my vote, I was spitting in his face. I never thought about it until I start testing myself based on those scriptures, those scriptures. And I went through 3 days of depression because all the things I believed to be true, I found it was a lie. And I supported those things. I embraced those things. I advocated those things. And it took me a while to come out of that, because when you look in the mirror at yourself, that's very difficult. That's a tough challenge. And to decide, okay, I got to decide, am I going to be a Christian champion or a political chump? Am I going to vote in a way that shows my love and my allegiance to the God I serve, or I'm going to remain a political chump, just vote based on what I thought was family tradition? And that was my awakening. 2 Corinthians 13:5.
When you say that you tested the way you were voting, what did that look like for you? How did you test the way that you were voting?
Well, the example was abortion. I don't believe in that. I don't support abortion of any type. But to vote for candidates and not even see the connection, I was so stuck on the Democrat Party and the donkey, I ignored the lamb. I ignored the lamb. I ignored the Lion of Judah. I was focused on the donkey, and it was just totally. I had to think about that for a minute and say, "Wait a minute, I'm crazy. I'm absolutely crazy." So it's really those two things, those two values, that kind of quickened my spirit and made me realize I need to get myself in check and really live my life, the rest of my life, in obedience to the scripture, what I thought I was doing up to that point. But, and it was tough for me, because that strongholds are hard to break. That was a stronghold in my life, very much. And going against family tradition, because when I accepted my thought of not voting my values, I start accepting this conservative philosophy, conservative values, and identify myself as a conservative. And I knew when I did that, I was going to separate myself from members of my family, in my community. I knew I was going to be suffer from them calling me names, but I took that on because I was voting my values, and I was going to do that without compromise. But later along in my life, God has pricked my spirit and showed me a way how to overcome the racist name calling that we'll talk about soon.
So, KCarl, first of all, thank you for being here. And you spoke to our group last night and brought the house down with your message of, really a message of hope in a time where our country is in a crisis situation. We're hearing conflicting messages about our country. Your message is very, very refreshing, encouraging, in its truth.
Yes.
And so I'd like to just, if you could, expound on how you tapped into this message that you are carrying to the country the way you are right now.
Good question. It all started right before when the emails started coming online with the internet. And someone texted me a quote from Frederick Douglass one time, and I'm a Democrat this time, right? And the quote was, Douglass said, "I'm a Republican, a black die-in-the-wool Republican, and I never intend to belong to any other party than Party of Freedom and Progress." I said, wait a minute. Frederick Douglass was a Republican? Frederick Douglass was an Uncle Tom? I said, and why did he say Freedom and Progress Republican Party, and he did not say Freedom and Progress Democrat Party? So at that point in time, I went on a reading binge. I read everything that Douglass wrote. I read all 3 of his autobiographies. I read his novel. I read every biography that existed at that time. I read University Press's collection of Douglass writings called the Douglass Papers, about 4 volumes, 1,000 pages. I read Philip Fauner's Selected Writings of Douglass, which is totally separate from Yale University Press. I went on an absolute reading binge to not just read about his life, but read about his philosophy and his thinking, because he turned my thinking right side up when I started reading this. So that's how it all got started. And as more and more I read about him, I said, wait a minute, this man's the forgotten prophet.
Yeah.
God used him just as well he used the Apostle Paul. I was on a radio show one time speaking, and I was talking about Frederick Douglass. Share you this quick story. Somebody called in and said, well, why are you going back 100-some years? You talking about Frederick Douglass. Can you find somebody more contemporary? I said, well, then let me ask you a question then. There are Christians who go back 2,000 years and read the writing of the Apostle Paul. Paul been dead 2,000 years now. We go back and read that writing for inspiration. But yet you're going to criticize me to go back 100 years to get some liberty inspiration?
Amen.
Hello, caller, are you there? Hello?
Mic drop. You know, I made a habit in my business career because I didn't complete college. I realized I needed to learn all I could. I've been really self-taught on business, but I studied business leaders, and then that led into political leaders, George Washington, Ben Franklin, Eisenhower, different folks. I'd never really looked at Frederick Douglass. My daughter, for this Christmas, gave me the book by Brian Kilmeade, which I highly recommend everyone read, called The President and the Freedom Fighter. And that book opened my eyes, and just a few weeks later, I come in contact with you. But I always, I've always wanted to be a champion with my life. I wanted to, I think the great dream of America is you can reach your full potential. That requires a lot of work and focus and on discipline. But Frederick Douglass, of all the leaders I've studied, became my hero.
Yeah. And
it's not because of his political or his he was a general in an army or anything like that, or some business leader. It's because of where he came from.
Yeah, things he had to overcome.
And then his spirit and how he literally went from slavery to counseling Abraham Lincoln on how to handle that crisis in our nation, and had such an impact on him. But his spirit was always one of forgiveness. It was always one of a message of hope, but also a prodding message. So I know you've had to find that as well. I've just read your book and now his book, and I'm pulling in all these other books that you've read. But expound on that. I mean, talk to us about him.
You articulated very well.
Yeah.
And Douglass is, because he was a slave for 20 years, and if anybody be really upset with America, and that wasn't Douglass. He understood the situation. He said, let's make it better. I remember, and I shared last night, when Douglass escaped from slavery, 10 years after he escaped from slavery, he wrote a letter to his former slave master. And in that letter he wrote to his former slave master, he didn't say, you need to apologize to me. No, Douglass said, I forgive you for all things you did to me. You can come to my house and eat inside, and I'm not going to make you eat outside like you made me eat outside. He said, I'm going to use you as an example of how men ought to treat each other.
Wow. Wow.
I don't know if I could have done that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a thug Christian. So, I'm like Peter, I cut your ear off. And walk on water, right?
That's right.
But you're exactly right. So Douglass is I think that the life of Douglass is so inspiring, because all the things he had to overcome and to be an achiever and an advisor to 5 U.S. presidents and financially wealthy. Nobody can out-victimize that.
Yeah.
So it's all about application. Douglass wasn't a genius. He had application.
That's right.
And so Douglass is such a great example. So back in my motivational speaking days, that's when I started leveraging the life of Douglass. And when I talk to inner city youth, or really young people, period, I teach them that success is not a secret. Success is a system. Let's take a look at Douglass' action plan for his life. And when you lay out Douglass' action plan for his life, the things he put in place to become an achiever, he was well-read like you. He was an avid reader. That's one of the things he embraced. And so Douglass lays out, and I realized whatever action plan could work for an ex-slave can also work for a free person if you apply
exactly
yourself.
Right. That's right.
So, perfect example. I thank God every day that we have the life of Douglass, but also more important, we have the literary legacy of Douglass to refute the false rhetoric of those who want to destroy America from the inside.
Yeah, you mentioned last night, and I'd never put any thought to this, but you brought out a great point about those who are following this path of really, it's a communist type path, and you compared Douglass with the author of communism.
Yeah.
And that was a great enlightenment. Could you share with our audience?
You take a look at in this battle for world dominance. In one side of the ring, you have Karl Marx, tyranny. That's the side, slavery. But the other side of the ring, we need to put Douglass in the ring. And when you compare the tale of the tape, really, when you compare the lives of Douglass, there's some things that come out. Number one, both of these gentlemen were born in 1818. Douglass was born into slavery. Karl Marx, when you really study his life, he's a poster child for white privilege. His daddy took care of him. He never had a real job in his life. He married into money with his wife. His uncle took care of him, and Ingalls, his business partner, helped take care of him. So, but here come Karl Marx writing about oppression, but he never been oppressed.
Yeah.
He had a theory. Let's look at Frederick Douglass, who was oppressed. He was a slave for 20 years. Douglass had real life experiences.
Yep.
So when you lay it out kind of plainly like that with people, they get it. And especially young people who's been indoctrinated into Marxism and to embrace Marxism and socialism, they embrace it because they never heard the counter message of liberty coming from the writings of Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
Thomas Sowell said one time, Thomas Sowell, he was a devout Marxist.
Yep.
He said what woke him up, he heard the counter message of liberty.
Yep.
And that's what we have to do. We got to leverage Douglass to do that. And here's one thing I didn't say last night. Douglass had this newsletter called the North Star. Douglass he's a writer and a speaker. And guess who was a subscriber to Douglass's newsletter? Karl Marx. Karl Marx cherry-picked Douglass' writing about humanity and took it a totally different way.
Wow, yeah. And I had a wise businessman tell me early in my career, he said, Steve, there's two things you never argue with. You may not agree with them, but you don't have to open your mouth and make yourself a fool. But one of them is success, and the second one was experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you're around someone with one of those two or both, combination, Frederick Douglass had both.
Yes.
You listen because they're speaking from experience. And you may not agree, but you'll be a fool to argue with them, right?
I'm going to use that because that's exactly right. Because how can you argue with a runaway slave?
Exactly.
About his love for liberty, his appreciation for the U.S. Constitution, his admiration for the Founding Fathers. When we've been told to hate the Founding Fathers, we got to shred the Constitution. But if you bring what Frederick Douglass had to say, that shuts people down.
Yeah, he actually brought that to Lincoln and said, listen, we don't need to do anything with these founding documents. They're precious.
That's right.
They're liberty documents.
Right.
We just got to live up to them.
Just got to live up to them. That's right. Exactly.
What a challenge.
Oh, boy. Thank
And
God.
it pierced the heart of the nation. His writings, his speeches, and that was his message. It was not destroy the country. Matter of fact, we need to save the country.
Yes, yes.
And his philosophies really enhanced Abraham Lincoln, and really began to guide his mind as to how to bridge this terrible travesty of slavery in our country. And it just so impressed me that I never knew he was that close to the president.
Yeah.
But he was.
He was.
You've also said before that it's not how our documents were written, it's how it's applied
That's
now.
right. That's right. When we were in office yesterday, Steve was, I guess, been listening to all my speeches. He was quoting me, man. I said, man, either he's aligned with my thinking or he's read all my books. And when we're talking about that, when it comes to the Constitution, Douglas said, the problem is not with the Constitution. The problem is in the application of the Constitution. So there's nothing wrong with the document. Just live up to it. And same thing with the Bible. There's nothing wrong with the Bible, but how you apply the Bible is what's important. Yeah. And so what you said in the office yesterday, that what Frederick Douglass had to say about liberty and the Constitution and human rights is more important than what any of the Founding Fathers had to say, because Douglass came from a former slave perspective. And the founders didn't bring that. Mm-hmm. So you can't play the race card on Douglass. He was a victim of racism. You can't call him a racist. Okay, he was a victim of racism. Mm-hmm. So it resonates with people. And when you leverage Douglass and you do it genuinely, racism comes off the table. Now you can have a dialogue with people, a conversation with people, and not a confrontation, because Douglass is that common ground. And
that is something missing in our nation today, and that's why your message is so powerful. In our group last night, it was just they could have listened to you all night long.
Well, I don't know about
because
that.
the message is so we've grown weary of confrontation, and so all of a sudden now you and I are having this conversation about this very, very polarizing subject, which is by design. Those are the enemies of freedom want this polarization. They don't want us to come together. But the message of Douglass is a prime example of a life lived that can bring people together.
Yeah.
Right.
The message God has given me when I speak to liberty advocates is one of hope, but also one of how to. That's what's missing. People go to these meetings and rallies, they get the rah-rah, but once things kind of settle, you go back home. How do you do it? How do you engage people regarding your conservative values, and you do it in a way where race is not an issue and you can have a conversation? I mean, we got situations where families are going home and their siblings or their children, grandchildren, calling them a racist. Well, how can you bring political healing to families? And that's one thing that God has shown me, that is to teach and empower liberty advocates with the confidence, the knowledge, and the skill to create a healthy atmosphere for political discourse and find a common ground. The answer is Frederick Douglass, and leverage Douglass's writings to help make your point and to really improve your brand.
So let's go ahead and get into when you told your friends and family that you were on the conservative side. How did that go?
It didn't go well for me. I mean, the name callings ran the gamut. I mean, it's almost like it's a trigger word. Soon as I said conservative, they shift to attack mode. Uncle Tom, they call me, foot shuffler, the house N-word. Your parents must be disappointed in you. How could you do such a thing? What's wrong with you? And that bothered me because I'm just expressing my Christian values here. There's nothing wrong with that. I said, okay, what's going on here? And that's when I started really praying about, Lord, help me to understand how I can win this narrative and inspire them to vote their values, because many of my friends are just as conservative as I am, or even more. And so over a period of time, that's when somebody sent me that quote from Frederick Douglass. And I started reading, became so obsessed. So a year later, after God has perfected this persuasive messaging model in me that I call the Frederick Douglass Republican engagement strategy, that has nothing to do with the Republican Party. The word Republicans mean that we live in a constitutional republic. A lot of people don't understand that either. They think that we live in a democracy. We're not. We're a constitutional republic. And so the story is that after that gathering we had a year later, once I perfected this messaging model, I invited those same friends of mine to my home, because I was going to practice it on them. Because I already practiced with my family members, and I knew it worked. Because when can you convince your family members to change how they vote? You can convince anybody, right? Yeah. So I knew I was ready for my friends. And the subject of politics surfaced again, and they asked me about my political identity because they're ready to attack me. I said, wait a minute. I'm more than a conservative. I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican, and I believe the life and power and values of Douglass. Respect for the Constitution, respect for life, the limited power of government, personal responsibility. I went through the list, and all of them, Steve, started talking about how they were Frederick Douglass Republican too. I shouted. When they left my house, that's I backed awesome. Up against the door, started pumping my fist. Yeah, baby, it worked.
Yep.
For the first time in my life, I had the confidence, the knowledge, and the skill to trump the race card, pun intended. And that's the message God has given me, where I travel the country. For the past 12 years, I preached to the choir and empower the choir with the knowledge, confidence, skill to trump the race card and win that narrative and get on the offense and send the left back to France, as I always say.
Yeah.
And so I got to tell you this story right quick. When God had perfected this messaging strategy in me, the first person I tested it on was my brother, 5 years my junior. He's a pastor. I had to set him down and said, look, I need you to read this. I need you to read the Felder's papers. I need you to read Douglas biographies. Read all of them. Read the Douglas papers. He went like a 6-month reading program. I put him on. And so one day, Steve, we have this shirt we produce. It has three big letters on it. FDR. It's not who you think, Frederick Douglass Republican, right? Mm. So we live outside of Birmingham. So I told my brother, hey, put this shirt on. Let's go to Atlanta. He said, okay. So drove up to Atlanta. He had no idea what was going on. I pulled up in front of a black barber shop over by Morehouse College. I said, get out. Go inside the Lion's Den. I'll come back and pick you up in 2 hours. He said, what? I said, brother, go inside the Lion's Den. You got to have faith that what I've been teaching you works. I've already done this. So you need to go ahead and experience this now. I'll pick you up in 2 hours. I'll be back. So he goes in. 2 hours later, I come back and pick him up. I said, how did it go? He said, man, this thing worked.
Yeah,
I said, what happened?
Awesome.
He said he went to the barber shop. He sat down now in the shirt. Of course, the shirt has the word Republican on it.
Mm-hmm.
There's about 13 black guys in the barber shop. After about 5 minutes after he sat down, 2 of them said to him in unison, are you a Republican? My brother stood up and said, well, I'm more than a conservative Republican. I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican. I believe in the life, power, and values of Frederick Douglass. My brother said for the next 40 minutes, the barbershop turned into a Frederick Douglass Bible study. The owner told my brother, can you come back, bring your book, have a book signing. Now, this is in the hood now.
Yeah.
Bring your book. Let's do a book signing out of my barbershop and bring some of those T-shirts. This is when Obama was president.
Wow.
So
it's powerful.
It's powerful.
There's your evidence. Yeah, there's your
powerful.
evidence.
When you go in the barbershop, you come out unshaved and unscathed. Very good.
Well, you've been on this speaking circuit now for 12 years with this message.
Yeah.
We're going to help get that message out with our organization, but other things have happened too in this process. You were telling us about the new school you and your brothers, I believe, are starting. And the story about the inner city kids that you tested this model out on. Could you expound on that?
Well, back in 1864, Douglass gave a speech. No, you got to understand, I'm a Frederick Douglass guy. I read everything that Douglass wrote and try to follow the action plan and things he advised because it worked for a slave, it worked for a free person. So Douglass in Baltimore, Maryland, he spoke to a majority black audience, standing room only. And he said to them in a compassionate way, he said, save your money, buy land, build schools, control the education of your child. Save your money, buy land, and build schools. I told my brother, I said, we got to build some schools. I'm in the fight to put pressure on the public school system to get better, but that's a long fight, and we're losing lives in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And you only get one chance to get the education of your child right, and I have a 10-year-old son. So because of President Trump's Opportunity Zone back in 2017, we found some property in Birmingham, Alabama, where it's actually in Irondale, Birmingham's located in the center of the state. What prompted me to look for this property, I have a younger brother, 10 years my junior, that's in Huntsville. He's a PhD physicist. He's a former NASA scientist. As a matter of fact, he graduated from high school with a D-. Now he's a PhD physicist. So
something clicked somewhere along the way.
Exactly right. Something clicked. And so he was very astonished to find out that in the black community where we grew up, they took physics out of the high school, number one. And in the black community, there was no STEM program for disadvantaged children. So he resigned from NASA, left NASA, went to the community, and he started robotics clubs at every grade level, okay? First grade, middle school, all up to the high school. And to recruit for his club members, robotics club members, he purposely went to every grade and asked for not the child getting straight A's. He said, I want the child getting straight F's. I want the child that's been classified as special need, and I want the child has one or both parents incarcerated. Those are the students that comprise his team at every grade level. So, and the secret to the sauce, what he did was he brought in STEM professionals, STEM professors, and STEM students to mentor, coach, and teach the children. Okay, that was the secret to the sauce right there. And then that was back in 2015. He entered his high school robotics team, Jemison High School, in the 2019 Huntsville Rocket City First Robotics Competition. His team, consisting of kids with failing grades, these kids who had been written off, okay, both parents incarcerated. Some of the members are diagnosed with Asperger, but they're not retarded, not at all. But they're treated that way. They finished number 1 in the city of Huntsville, number 2 in Madison County. I'm sorry, number 1 in the city of Huntsville, number 1 in Madison County, number 2 in the state.
Wow.
They shattered the educational model because they defeated magnet schools that have a STEM focus. These young kids defeated schools they can't even get in. And oh, by the way, the school they're attending is on Alabama's failing schools list.
Wow.
It's a Title I schools.
Wow.
So when he broke that paradigm, that educational paradigm, it caught the attention of the academic world, really the community leaders all across the state. The academic world ignored it. Because why? He broke a paradigm.
Yep.
Okay? But community leaders all across the state asked him to expand his STEM curriculum, his program throughout the state. And I said, look, you need to locate to the center of the state. That's why we bought that property. That's where we in the process of buying this property in Irondale. So the goal is this. We are going to launch a Frederick Douglass STEM Academy, and it will also be a STEM center, meaning that now we're going to work with parents to help them get certification in STEM. Engineering, prosthesis, cybersecurity, biotechnology.
That's amazing.
Because you don't have to go to school. Matter of fact, I have 7 grandchildren. I told my son, unless your son or your child is going to school to get a degree in hardcore science, they should go to college. If they're not getting a degree in hardcore science, they don't need to go to get a good paying job or have a career. You don't have to go to college for that. You get a certification for that.
That's right. Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing. And one of the aspects now, what's really going to make this thing work, what we decided to do, we had to bring in the idea that when we have these kids all day in school, we have them all day at school, but they go home to the projects where it's not conducive to learning. So on our property, we're going to build 300 smart apartments. So now when a family has a child in our school, we'll pull them out of the project, put them to the apartments. So now when the child leaves and go home, we know the child's going home to a safe place to learn, a safe place to play.
That is amazing.
You mentioned something that the left is afraid of power of speech or freedom of speech because they know the power that's behind it.
Yeah. Well, I was referencing a quote from Frederick Douglass. Again, going back to Douglass. Douglass gave a speech in Boston called A Plea for Free Speech in Boston. And, quote, Douglass said, quote, tyrants cannot tolerate free speech because they know the power of it.
Well, it's like he's living today,
yes,
right? And the society we're in today, because these tyrants are literally trying to shut down the free speech.
And Douglas said that's the first thing they attack is free speech. And I said, man, this brother's a philosopher. It's clear.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's exactly right.
It's clear.
Well, I want to dive into a couple of things you just said. Now, these young people were basically outcasts. They were given up on, society given up on. They've been labeled certain things, and that their grades and their life reflected what they've been basically believed about themselves, right? So you bring these outside skilled people in, and what happened over a course of just a few years, right? They become champions in a very, very difficult world. Matter of fact, a world that society had said, we don't even need to try to teach these kids this stuff, right? So I want to dive into 2 things. Number one, you made the comment that the academic community, they did not embrace that.
Yeah.
And what's your takeaway from that? Why did they not? I mean, I would think, holy moly, we got a success story. Let's roll. Why did they not do that?
This is my thought. The school that these students are in are Title I schools. Okay, Title I schools get a lot of money. There are some people who want these children to grow and develop and become functional citizens because it's about money. They're gonna get less money. If we get rid of Title I schools, well, some folks may lose a job or be classified to another career. So I think there's an element where people don't want young people to succeed because they're comfortable in that check they're getting, and so they're not succeeding.
And so in that situation, those in power are putting themselves in front of the product, the children, right? That's okay. That's number one. The second thing is to me is more fascinating. So what happened inside those children is the magic that we have to ignite throughout the country. They, from my perspective now, you've got the better perspective here, but it appears to me something happened in their belief system about themselves.
Most definitely. It happened on day one. Imagine that I'm coming to your class to recruit students, and you're making straight F's. I want you. I want you. Special needs students, I want you.
So all of a sudden they felt a value.
That never happened to them like that. When somebody comes to their class looking for the talented child, or the teacher's going to say, I'm going to recommend him, he's getting straight A's. No, I don't want your recommendation. I want to see the list of children who's on a trajectory of dropping out, failing. That's who I want. And let me talk to that child. I want you to become a member of my robotics team.
It's in business, okay? I'm coming from my business background.
Right.
We've been very blessed. We've been able to build very successful businesses, but it's that same ingredient is what I attribute it to. It's looking at a line supervisor. And I tried my best to create in that person value. I recall a big manufacturing company that we had. We just sold this a couple of years ago. But every Friday morning, I would drive an hour and a half. I would meet with them and feed all of our 24-hour operation. All of our line supervisors would come in. These are just blue-collar, hardworking people. And I'd have breakfast with them. And I would sit around the table and I'd say, okay, and I had financial reports. I had 14 or 15 lines that were running. I had a daily profit loss. I knew exactly where we were. But I would first sit them down, thank them for what they're doing. And then I would express to them the mistakes I made this week, and maybe it was the banker or this deal or that deal, and what I'm doing to correct them. And I just want you to know that appreciate your hard work, and I'm behind the scenes. I can make mistakes too. Here's some of our victories. But let's go around the room. I see your line was in the red. We didn't make money the last 24 hours on that line. What happened? And they would begin, because I was vulnerable, I created value in them. I needed to find out what happened. It wasn't a punishment. And it may be a bearing went out, or it may have been this, that. And I would turn to my leadership team and say, why is the bearing going out on this machine? This man right here is working his butt off. So we got to do at our level whatever we got to do to make him successful. And that created a value. We did multiple other things, but it comes back to that. So how do we do that in this environment that we're in today, where it seems that the CRT, for example, is a message of no hope, a message that you're a victim. Can you expound on that? Can you see the correlation?
I see the correlation.
Yeah.
You got to show love.
Amen.
I think 95% of the problem is love, because when you talk about and think about these young people, you don't know what they're going through. And the reason why they're getting bad grades, not because they're stupid. What's going on at home? Are they even getting fed when they're home? Or they go home, they can't do homework because they got to babysit their young brother or sister? You don't know. But we had one of our students, we didn't realize till he told us that he and his mother and his little younger brother was living in a van. That's not conducive to learning.
No.
And so it's about showing interest, showing love. And I want to say to you, in 2019, when that team did very well, but they also participated in 2018, they didn't do as well. What happened was, during the competition, when you build a robot, the robot has to perform a certain task, and the robot failed. And so they had a choice. We can go to lunch, or you can work on this robot. We said, let's go to lunch. No, we're going to work on this robot. That's when it clicked. They realized they can do this. So can you imagine these kids coming into an auditorium where everybody else, their other teams, they have their two chest and drill machines, press down drill machines. We come in with a tube box and handheld drills and whoop behind.
I love it. It's David Goliath.
It's all about showing that love and showing interest, and not only teaching them, but teaching them. I learned that, without a vision, people perish. Some of these young people don't have a vision, so we put them with mentors. The mentor will share their vision with them till they get their own vision.
Yep.
And once they get their own vision, they're gone. They're taken off. And so it was all about really taking the time to understand that person, that child, and to get lost in their success. Not worry about my own success, but get lost in their success.
And really, as a Christian, it's a picture of Christ.
Yes.
Where a holy God left a holy throne, looked at an unredeemable people, and provided a way for redemption. It's a picture of Christ. That's the power of it, as I see it. Yeah. You're creating redemption from an impossible situation.
Yeah, and they realize they're not giving another chance.
That's right.
And one of the aspects, what my brother's doing so powerful, the way he explains it, he said, basically, all I'm focusing on, I'm teaching these young people, these children, how to apply the scientific method to their life. Not just in terms of building this robot, to their life. How to become a critical thinker. That's what the left is upset with. They don't want that. They want us to be sheepish. And they want to tell us how to vote instead of researching ourselves to figure out how we're going to vote.
You got to tell the story about the fourth grader.
True story.
Yeah.
We got a young fourth grader that's in our program. This is about a couple of years ago. And he said, I was asking about what he thought about the program. He said, when I'm rebuilding a robot, I'm rebuilding my life. I'm a transformer. I'm Megatron.
That is hope.
The light has come on.
Amen.
Another true story.
That's awesome.
Another true story. Walking down the hallway, one of the schools, my brother, and we were going, because this program was after school program. So the resource officer, the police officer, was taking a student to the principal's office because he was back in the classroom shooting dice. Back there throwing craps, right? And so my brother said, because my brother knew the resource officer, he said, what's going on? He said, Dr. Smith, this young man's back in the classroom shooting dice. And my brother said to him, you back there shooting dice? He said, yeah. He said, what's the probability of rolling a 7? The young man said, 50%. My brother said, 50%? You didn't get caught because you shooting dice. You got caught because you know what you're doing. He said, it's not 50%? No, it's not 50%. So the young man joined my brother's program because he was curious why rolling dice, you don't get 50% 7s all the time.
Wow.
So you got to meet people where they are.
That's right. That's
you got to meet where they are.
Great story. Yeah. That's awesome.
I love that because I think it shows the value in mentorship.
Yes.
And where it can take someone when you say, I see you and I know what you can be. Let's get there.
And once they get it, they'll never go back.
You taught them how to fish.
They'll never go back.
Instead of giving them fish. That's right.
Taught them how to fish and teach them how to own the pond.
That's right.
That's right.
You've shared a great story of Paul in the Bible, how he defeated the narrative that surrounded him every day, everywhere he went, with 2 points. 1, that he had a testimony, and 2, that he had good deeds. Could you expound on that?
Most definitely. I believe wholeheartedly the Bible is a how-to book. So this whole thing with trumping this race car and winning this narrative, I was praying and said, Lord, I know the Bible is a how-to book. If Lord, we can ever figure out how we can trump this race card out here, we can save this nation. But until we do that, Lord, it's not going to happen. And God pricked my spirit. I started reading and studying and really analyzing the ministry of Apostle Paul. And the more I read it, I said, oh my gosh, the answer's right here. So it is this, before the Apostle Paul became a champion of Christianity, he was also well known for being a bloodthirsty persecutor of the Christians. And that reputation preceded him because the Gentiles shook with fear when they heard Paul's name. And then we know Paul had his road to Damascus transformation. But when you think about it, Paul had a tremendous impact in the early growth of the church. But in order to do that, he had to overcome the negative perception that the Gentiles had of him, because the Gentiles thought he was double dealing. He was speaking with a forked tongue because he was persecuting the Jews, come back and saying, I'm a Christian evangelist. And the Gentiles saying, wait a minute now, you think you're fooling somebody. Mm-hmm. We know what you did in Jerusalem and you did to those folks. We know what you did. You're going to come tell us that you're a Christian evangelist because you want us to become Christians so you can kill us too. Mm-hmm. So Paul had to overcome that because they thought he was a racist. insincere. So in order to overcome that, when you read the ministry and study the ministry of Apostle Paul, he basically did two things. Number one, he had a testimony. He didn't just quote the Christ. He talked about how the teaching of the Christ changed his thinking, changed his mind, made him a new person. He had a transformation. Okay? He was like he used to be. But along with the transformation, he had some good deeds. He was in the community helping improve the people's lives, the quality of the lives of the people that he's supposed to be racist towards, right? He traveled throughout Asia Minor, Roman Empire. He was in the community. So when you have a testimony and you have good deeds, and when you put the two together, you're unstoppable in changing your public perception. And that's what conservatives are suffering with. Conservatives has a brand problem. So as I talk about, how do we get over that? How do you trump the race card? We got to have a similar political affirmation. I believe in the life and power and values of Frederick Douglass. I hold Frederick Douglass in high esteem. And once you have that story or that affirmation that you're telling people that you've been transformed, because what, quote unquote, conservatives are racist, but I've been inspired by the life of Frederick Douglass. I hold him in high esteem. People now thinking, oh, you had your Saul to Paul conversion. Even though you've never been a racist, you need to do it because you're guilty by association, right?
Yeah.
So you got that political declaration, and you got to have some good deeds. Once you put the two together, the good deeds, working in the community, doing some things in the community that you're supposed to be racist towards, the two together, they're powerful. That's how you trump the race card. That's how you improve your brand. That's what Paul did. If it worked for Paul, it worked for anybody.
It'll work for anybody. Yeah, there's the model.
That's the model.
There's the model.
You're not gonna find anybody else. God gave me that.
Yep.
I'm blessed to be. God is allowing me to do something great for Him. That's been my prayer since I was 16. But
amen.
I think I'm doing it now.
You are.
Why do you think the word conservative is coined to racism?
Number one, because of the effective propaganda machine of the left, where they project, because they're the biggest racists. But when you call someone racist, if I call you a racist and your response is weak or non-existent, some of that's going to stick. And so they know that by calling someone a racist, it gives them a political advantage because it minimizes you and your effectiveness. Because the statement I shared last night, which is so, and I had the Democrat friend told me this, he said, the truth doesn't matter. I said, what you mean by that? Truth does matter. He said, no. If I can demonize you, call you a racist, I keep calling you a racist, and some of that, not all of it, and people think that you're a racist, they perceive you're a racist. When you speak, because I painted you as a racist, the truth you speak doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. The evidence you give doesn't matter. The statistics you share doesn't matter. I've already demonized you. I've already discredited you. So your truth doesn't matter because I won the propaganda battle.
I always say that truth doesn't matter. What's perceived as the truth is what matters. Because what a person perceives as truth is the truth to the one perceiving it.
That's right. That's what we're dealing with.
That's what we're dealing with. Yep.
And that's why we're getting our clocks clean as liberty advocates, as conservatives. Yep. We got to win that battle. And
well, you've given us a roadmap to do that. That's what this is all about. And it's, I know a lot of folks, and racism is still out there. We've come a long way.
Yes.
But there a lot of folks in the Anglo community, for example, when they hear that word, we vapor lock, because we shut it down, right? So I know in our organization, we're just going to continue to speak the truth. We've got a benevolent arm that's just starting up. We're waiting to learn, and but we want to reach out to this community, all communities, not only our African American family, but also our Latino family, which we've made great strides there already. But the message of hope and liberty of Frederick Douglass is a message, as you've so eloquently said last night, that really pierces that facade that's out there. And you've witnessed it, you've seen it. You talked about your brother going to the barbershop. I love that story. Yeah. And we just, the nation has got to come together. And what I see in the Frederick Douglass message is a way to do that.
He is that bridge.
He's the bridge.
He's the bridge over the abyss of racism and class envy that has been purposely created by the Marxist liberals, but they don't have an answer for Douglass. All they got is Karl Marx. He's a chump.
Yeah.
And Douglass is a champion.
That's right.
We got to leverage that. We got to leverage it.
Amen.
Robert Brown Elliott said once, "I am a slave to principles. I call no party master."
I share that quote a lot every time I go speak, especially in black churches and NAACP meetings. Robert Brown Elliott, during Reconstruction, the first 7 blacks that served in the U.S. Congress were black Republicans. One of them was Robert Brown Elliott from the state of South Carolina. And I tell people, he said, I'm a slave to principles. I call no party master. For KCarl Smith, I'm a slave to Christian principles. I don't call the Democrat Party or the Republican Party my master. I'm a vote in a way that shows my love and my allegiance to the God I serve without compromise. When you share that quote with people, it puts them in a position they got to have a come to Jesus meeting in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Am I voting my values or am I stuck on a label? And I tell people, look, it's not about the elephant of the Republican Party. It's not about the donkey of the Democrat Party. It's about the Lion of Judah. It's about the Lamb.
Amen.
That's what it's about. Get rid of the labels and focus on the Lamb, focus on the Lion.
And 1,000 years from now, looking back,
you don't care if you don't.
that's the only thing that's going to matter.
That's right.
Yep.
You're not going to get to heaven. You're not going when you're Democrat or you're
exactly
Republican.
Right.
But did you support me?
Did you support the master?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Wow.
With the writings of Frederick Douglass, how do you think he would respond to the teachings of CRT in our school systems?
Well, CRT is nothing new in terms of what they're advocating. The assertions, when you take a look at the CRT, what they're asserting is really the same narrative back in Douglass's time. That, the slave master believed that blacks could not handle liberty. So they felt that they were God-given gift to put them in slavery without their consent now, to take care of them because they were inadequate intellectually, and they were somehow victims. That's a mindset that the oppressor and tyrants used back then. And Douglass, being a philosopher, wrote about some things. Because you got to realize when Douglass started speaking, when he was hired by William Lloyd Garrison, he was hired to tell his story. And Douglass said one time, "So I need to philosophize about some things." And Garrison said, "No, Frederick Douglass, don't philosophize about nothing. People want to hear your story. They don't want to hear your philosophy." That's why he broke away from Garrett and started his own newspaper. But it's all about, there's nothing new under the sun. The techniques of oppression used by the plantation slave master are identical to the techniques of oppression used by a slave government. Communism. It's the same. So that blacks are perpetual victims of white racism. And what the CRT is all about, they want to paint the picture and make the case, try to make the case that racism that exists in the United States is at its worst. That there have been any gains. They're saying there have been no improvements. Blacks are just as a victim now they ever been, and which is really a lie. Because the racism that does exist in the United States is pale in comparison to the racism that Douglass dealt with, even my parents dealt with. We've come a long way. We got more work to do. We still got to remain vigilant. But to tell a lie that it's the same or it's worse, it's a lie straight from hell. And we got to call it out. And the best way to call it out and point it out is leverage the life and the writings of Frederick Douglass when racism was at its worst. When you bring what Douglass had to say about black folks being victims, Douglass said, wait. He said, stop treating black folks like they're a special class of citizen. He said, y'all didn't do anything special for the Irish.
Exactly.
So
right.
stop treating black folks like they're a social guinea pig. He said, leave us alone and mind your own business. And that's what we're saying. Leave us alone because your social policies is causing us positive injury. Your Great Society program tore up black families, caused single parent families. All these gimmicks and these experiments you're playing with people's lives, you really throwing them. Just leave folks alone. That's basically what he's saying.
That's exactly what he said.
Yeah.
Yep. And again, the weight of his words come from the experience of his life.
Unlike Karl Marx.
Exactly. Who's anyway, that's powerful.
You gotta leverage it, right?
Powerful
You gotta leverage
message.
it.
Yes.
So I see a lot of Frederick Douglass Republicans around this table with him.
You do. There's a quote that I love, and it's, "You don't run wild when you're tethered to your why." And that's a question that I ask myself daily. And I think that's why your story is also so inspirational to me, because I want to be the type of Christian that tests my faith and tests my beliefs politically and in everyday life to make sure that I'm constantly living up to what God has called me to do, but in my personal life, making sure that I'm a good Christian, that I'm a good wife, that I'm a good daughter. And so your story just resonates with me and challenges me to refer everything that I am doing back to the Word of God.
Well said. Well said. I can't say anything to that.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's go into something local that's happening in Polk County. Recently, well, before the podcast, we all received the excerpts of the 16 books that are being challenged. In your words, do you think those books are appropriate for minors?
I have a 10-year-old son, so I read the excerpts. I don't want them to bring this to my son's attention or make it available for him. I don't have those books in my home. So what gives them the right, who they're supposed to be serving me as a taxpayer, what gives them the right and authority to bring this kind of filth and expose it to my child without my consent? That's the big thing. It's not without my consent. We have to go around and check up on them because they're doing it without our consent. That's the big problem I have. Yeah. But when I read these things, this is nothing but trash here. That's not literature. I don't know what grounds he's trying to push it in. It's trash.
Well, I think in our position, in the media, says the story we're banning books has nothing to do with that. They should be banned. But we weren't even asking for that. When you think about this constitutional republic we live in, we're in an era where law and order is getting very gray, especially in particular areas of the country. So what we did is we heard from parents who were concerned. We did our research. This was a 5-month project. We went. Our model is Matthew chapter 18. We went to the officials who were responsible. We found the excerpts and we simply went to them and said, we think that this is going against Florida statute. So what's a Florida statute? Well, again, we go back to how our country was founded. We elect representatives who go to Tallahassee or Washington, D.C. They pass legislation, and that legislation reflects the will of the people who elected them, right? So those statutes in Florida are the will of the people. And we have a judicial branch to ensure that those statutes do not cross the constitutional principles that we have. These statutes pass that. Then the next step, it goes to the executive branch, and their job is to enforce the will of the people, which is in a form of a statute. So what we did is we went to the officials who were responsible and said, we feel, based on our legal team, that these children are being exposed to something that the will of the people said they should not be exposed to. The legal side of that argument agreed. So we then went back to the officials and gave them an opportunity to correct it. And we were told basically there's no way to do it. There's not even a clear pathway how these books got there. So we brought it to the light and have it addressed. But once they decided they weren't going to do anything about it, our model is go to the next step. So we went to the next step, began applying pressure, and the executive branch of our county said, no, this is serious stuff here. We've got to do something about it. And once the executive branch got involved, all of a sudden things began to happen. And what are we doing? We're reviewing, we're verifying. They either follow those statutes or they go against those statutes. If they go against the statutes, we've got to protect our children, which is the right. So it's a real simple concept. From our heart, though, if there's any, Jesus said, look, if you cause one of these little ones to stumble, it'd be better for a millstone to be tied around your neck and thrown and cast into the sea. Who's defending the children? Not one conversation on the other side has mentioned the children.
Yes.
We stand here as our organization. We will defend our citizens. We will do everything in our power to protect our children.
That's why I so love what CCDF USA is doing, because you're taking on the bully. We need somebody in the fight that's taking on the bully. But not only do you have a bark, you got a strong bite. And that's what the other side is fearing. They're afraid of that bite. We will bite, and we're going to bite hard. We're not going to let go, because our children are at stake. You're messing with our children here.
That's exactly
in
right.
order to bring in a lifestyle or a way of thinking that's really demoralizing, not just to a nation, but to them personally.
Yep.
Stay out of our business. Leave us alone. Like Douglas said, mind your own business.
Leave us alone. Yeah, and people say, well, we're the bullies, right? We're not the bullies.
No.
We're the big brother coming to beat up the bully who's been beating on our families, right?
That's right. That's right.
Out of all the books, one or two of them are written by African American authors. One of the comments we're receiving is that it's racist to review these books. What do you have to say to that?
I went those excerpts, and Toni Morrison, her writing was the worst, the most vile, in my opinion. It's like saying that blacks cannot be perverts, that we cannot be sinful. Yeah, we can. It's not just white people doing that. Black folks can do it too. So that's what they do, though. They're going to call you a racist because you're calling them out. And that's what communists do. To push that agenda, anybody that opposes them is going to be called Uncle Tom. It's going to be called a racist, a Ku Klux Klanner. That's their method of operation.
Yeah, they confuse racism with accountability, or accountability with racism.
Yeah.
It's really a diversion, right? It's a diversion because they know the power of the word.
It's a diversion, and it's they know how to push people in a way where it try to diminish your impact and your influence.
Right. And just so you know, KCarl, we did not even look at who wrote the books. We were looking at the content of these books, but they brought up a great point. So we are researching these writers. We are finding out where their source of revenue is from.
That's right.
Other writings. We're going to continue down that path. They brought it up, and we're going to make sure the public knows all about these publishers. The truth will set you free.
When I got those excerpts, I made sure that I didn't focus on the first page. That's where the author's name was. I was told. I went straight to the writings, and I started marking. I said, "This is all of them." I marked. They got to go. I said, "This is the worst." Like 3 X's I put on it, and I turned to the front. It's a black author. You know, what did Manny Johnson say in his book, Color, Covenants, and Common Sense? He said, a black ruler can be just as brutal as a white ruler. Mm-hmm. But they want to make white people to be the boogeyman, and as if black folks are always right. Black folks not always right, and white people not always wrong.
Those excerpts made me really uncomfortable reading them, because as a grown woman, I don't even want to, the Bible tells us to guard our hearts and guard our eyes. And even reading those excerpts just made me so uncomfortable, because again, like you said, those books aren't in my home, and I'm not reading those books. So it's scary that they are accessible to young students.
I've been trying to figure out, what I know what's behind it, but just think about it now. This is an educational environment. Why you can't help our children learn how to read and learn how to write? Why do you want to bring something in to shape their belief in a God they may be serving, or a lifestyle that the parents don't appreciate? What the left is doing, they realize in order to have a revolution, you must destroy the culture. You can't have a revolution without destroying the culture. You got to destroy the institutions, family, and mostly attacking Judeo-Christian values. That's what they're doing.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's a subject that also the citizens have struggled to push back on. These are our children, and there's a new video or new movie out right now questioning whose children are they. They are still our children, and we have values, a value system. Many of our families do, but our main mission here in this particular situation is when you think about a minor, and we talked about the power of how a child can be changed just by how they perceive themselves. What we saw, again, going against state statute, our citizens, the will of our people said this is inappropriate because it's getting mixed into the molding of a child's mind, which is going to lead it all begins with a thought. It could possibly lead to things and activities that lead them down a wrong path that eventually leads to destruction.
Exactly right.
And then you couple that with the issue we're having in our country today, and our sheriff is great about it. But we as far as catching these bad people, pedophiles, human trafficking, you start looking at the bigger picture. We saw videos yesterday where the United Nations is promoting these same books, these same concepts. UNICEF, they're doing it globally.
Not an accident.
It's not an accident.
Yeah.
So we're just proud to be able to say we will take the bullet. Let them come at us. We were going to do everything in our power.
Well, I'm happy that you're all doing what you're doing, and the way I could be a part of it. It's all about fighting for our children, and this is the turning point for our nation right here.
It is.
This is what we're doing is history making, because we'll go to the left or we'll go to the right, and we're going to fight. It's
a great time to be an American, I tell people. Great time.
One of the comments that we're receiving on our social media is if we are reviewing all these other books, why aren't we reviewing and, quote, trying to ban the Bible as well? What would you say to that?
I'll say nothing to that. I mean, you got to understand the people who are asking questions like that are the same people who embrace infanticide. And I do believe, I share this with Steve, people on the left, I mean, I'm talking about those who are really ruling all of this, pulling the strings, not those who vote that way. They don't know what's going on. They have a reprobate mind. They don't have a conscience. God said, I'll take that away from you. And so when you have a reprobate mind, you don't have a conscience. There's nothing to slow you down. You can always try to create ways to hurt someone. And so to make a comment like that, I just wave my hand and say, keep on going. Bring me something else. It's not worth responding to that.
Of course, the books that we're looking into, there's committees formed now. So, we've got citizens and other people. We got people on our staff that are going to be a part of that to review these books. And we had one thought, it's a good question. Why don't we put the Bible in there? Because part of the review is you got to read it.
Maybe have some transformation.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And, another beautiful concept that's come out of this is, in truth, that's one way to do it. Let's go ahead and put it in there. Let's see if it needs to be in the school or not. But
they're run so fast the opposite direction.
I know. But truth never needs to be defended.
That's right.
It defends itself.
That's right.
Yep.
I won't waste time on that.
One of my final questions is, since you have a heart for mentoring, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
To my younger self?
Mm-hmm.
Focus on discovering why you're here. Discover your purpose in life. Why did God make you? And once you discover your purpose in life, your passion will kick in. And once your passion kick in, once you understand why you're here and God called you and made you, and you take that obsession, you make it a profession, money will follow you, because God has to pay child support.
Amen.
Yeah.
Steve, what would you tell? What would be your piece of advice to your younger self?
It'd go right along with what KCarl said. The key, I didn't really find. I've always been a believer, and so I've had a faith in my life, and I found that all of us are groping to find this purpose. If we really, really look ourselves in the mirror, a lot of the frustration our people have is they don't have that faith model to say, "Hey, there is a reason I'm here on this earth." So for me, it happened to me at age 40, when I really stopped long enough, prayed for over 8 months, read a great book by John Eldredge called The Journey of Desire, and it changed my life. If I could have done that at a younger age, I don't know if I'd have been ready for it, but it's about really sitting down and saying, "Okay, Lord, what do you want me to do? I'm yours. I don't own anything, so I want to do with my life what you have set out for me to do." And so in my early life, that was just following my heart. So, for example, what led me into the United States Navy was I had a heart for our nation. I felt like I owed my nation something. I wanted to give back. And so I followed my heart, and that came from my grandfather, who served in World War II in the Navy. And so I took that step, and then that led me to a whole new world of things that ultimately led me to my business partner, who still lives in Texas. I was in the Navy in Texas, and that's where we met. So then, but there comes a phase. I just say follow your heart. I would not do anything different. It's led me down the right path. And passion, heart is the same word. You can interchange those words. But there comes a time in your life where when you're really serious, I believe God knows when that time is, and he comes to you. And it's probably, at least in my case, it was the greatest act of faith. You would probably attest to that too, because he makes you do some pretty stupid stuff on the outside. It doesn't make sense. Why would you leave a job and take a huge cut in pay to follow this path that God tells you he thinks you need to be on? And then all of a sudden these doors open up and you wind up 15 years later, and it was the very dream that he put in your heart that I still carry in my wallet today from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I share it with you, if I may. I have a son. My oldest son is 41 years old. He's an electrical engineer. He's been employed by the Defense Intelligence Agency for the past 17 years. He's a government employee. So when President Biden came out with the mandates, the shot mandates, not a vaccine, it's a shot, the jab mandate, my son said, I'm uncomfortable putting something in me that I don't know what I'm putting in me. I have a problem with that. It's my right. So he applied for religious exemption, and they came back to him and said, well, it's going to take several months to get that approved. You probably won't get an answer until May. But until then, you got to do these. You got to wear a mask at your desk every day. You got to get your swab done in your nose 3 times a week. So my son said, basically, for between now and May, you're going to just play games with me. So I said, okay. So my son put in his resignation. After 17 years, he has 7 children now. And the 8th one, his wife is pregnant now with my 8th grandchild. January the 28th of this year was his last day of employment. He said, I'm gone. He's going to take a year off, he said, enjoy his family, and he's going to tap his entrepreneur skills and watch God open doors.
Absolutely. That's what happened to me. That's what happened to me too. I there's my card. I wrote this back in 2000, where I put what I thought God's plan was for me after 8 months. So if I could challenge anyone at any age, is understand the fact if you'll get along with God, he'll impress things in your mind. Write those goals down, write those things down, and you look at them every day, pray over them every day, and watch the doors open up. And it's not going to be easy. It doesn't make it easy. You don't want it easy. You want to grind through things. So it's training you for the success that's coming. And so people want instant success. It's something that I really kind of coach young people not to look for instant success. You want to pay the price, because when you get to the other end, you can only give glory to God, number one, and number two, you'll know how to handle the success. You'll stay humble because you know it was him the whole time. So
I think our listeners will be able to be inspired by both of your guys' stories. So thank you so much for sharing today. KCarl, thank you for being here.
No, my pleasure.
Brother, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I felt like
Pleasure's all mine.
I found a brother from another mother.
That's right, brother. Yeah.
God bless you.
Really
thank you for your ministry.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
KCarl, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing the writings of Frederick Douglass. With these writings, our listeners can now win the narrative and advance the truth in the message of liberty. Thank you for joining me today on Liberty USA. If you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever platform you're listening on. Remember, freedom is in your DNA.